Okay. Great. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the October 20th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to order. I am President Erin, and the Executive Committee meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, and as extended by Section 2475, signed by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021. Section 2475 also allows for town councils, state boards, and other bodies to continue to hold remote public meetings until April 1st, 2022. To provide public access to the meeting while limiting the potential abuse of video conferencing technology, members of the public may view the proceedings at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. And as those on the call got the pop-up, this meeting is being recorded. So please be conscious and aware that you're on camera if you choose to share your camera. And with that, I have to do roll call. So if everyone could unmute, I'd appreciate it. Again, if I butcher anyone's name or pronounce it incorrectly, please let me know, but please know it's unintentional. Okay, here we go. Sharonda Almeida.
Present.
Keith Bergman.
Present.
Karen Canfield.
Present.
Adam Chapdelaine.
Present.
Bob Cohen. Mayor Joseph Curtatone. Tom Daniel. John DePriest.
Present.
Yolanda Greaves.
Present.
Sandra Hackman.
Here.
Mo Handel.
Here.
Tabor Keeley.
Here.
Angie Liu.
Here.
Steve Olenoff.
Here.
Caitlin Pasafaro. George Proakis. Courtney Rainey.
Present.
Jenny Raitt.
Here.
Vandana Rao.
Present.
Sam Seidel.
Here.
Steve Silvera.
Present.
Lauren Shirtliff. Mayor Spicer. Juan Vega. Elaine Vina.
Present.
Yep. Present twice. Got it. And Erin Wortman. Present. Great. Thank you all for indulging me in that. Next up on the agenda is the approval of minutes from September 22nd, 2021, which I believe we do not have. Correct, Mark? Oh, you're muted. Okay.
Yes, that is correct, Erin. As I explained in the email yesterday, due to an illness on staff, we've not quite finished those minutes yet, but we will have the September and the October minutes for your review at the November meeting.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Sorry about that. I had a moment there. I was just reading and I forgot about the email, but great. All right. Next up is the report of Treasurer. Treasurer Sam.
Thank you, President Erin, and hello to everybody. So in this month's, I was going to say in this month's Treasurer's Report, we're going to look at the July 2021 income statement. Only a couple of points to note there. The numbers look good. Just a reminder, July starts the new fiscal year. So this is really the start of a 12-month process that we'll be working through over the course of this year. These are the preliminary numbers from the new fiscal year. The only things I'd note is that we have a new overhead rate. We have a lower, tighter overhead rate. And so that will be a new reality as we go forward over the 12 months. We were above the overhead rate at 122% in July, but that's not untypical. It's a time of vacations. People take time off. It was also a time of the COVID lightening up a little bit, so people getting a chance to maybe get away from work. That's borne out a little bit in the direct labor number was the only one I'll point out, which was a little below budget. But that we expect all that to even out over the course of the year. Nothing else really to point out here, starting a new fiscal year. That's the report of the treasurer. I would entertain any questions or motion to accept the treasurer's report.
Sandra?
Sam, can you remind me how the overhead rate is set?
Yes, so well, I actually might lean to Mark here. It's a process that the agency goes through to determine exactly, my words, Mark will clarify this, what they need as an overhead rate over the course of the year to balance things out. But that's gone through a very deliberative process with Sheila, Mark, and the team to figure out exactly what, for lack of another way to say it, we can bear as an agency to keep it tight and clean and lean, but not punish ourselves with something that's too tight. Mark, I'm going to turn this over to you to help us all understand how the overhead rate is.
Very complete and articulate. I would note that our overhead rate has been in the high 1-teens for many years now, and we did raise it, I think, to 122 or 123 last year to mainly deal with the issues we were facing because of the COVID pandemic. We are now able, in this first year after COVID, so-called, to get back to our more usual overhead rate. That overhead rate is approved by MassDOT in its role as cognizant agency for the Federal Highway Administration. This year also, in a little bit of a twist, we had to get the overhead rate approved by the EDA in Washington. But that's why we're sticking, I think, with 118 for this year. And even though we're a little bit high in July, I'm sure we'll be able to meet it through the course of the fiscal year.
That's our best combined answer. That's the overhead rate, as explained. Other questions, comments? I would entertain a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
So
Make the
moved.
motion.
I
Second.
heard Tabor. Tabor on the second. Sorry, who made the motion?
I did.
John,
John
Doe.
DePriest. John
John
DePriest.
Okay, great. Thank you. President Aaron, can I hand it back to you for the vote?
You may. So that
Thank
motion
you.
was made by John DePriest with a second made by Tabor. Sorry, I'm looking at my second screen here so I can get the list up. Here we go. All right. Thank you so much, Sam. All right, if everyone could come off mute so we can vote. As you remember, a roll call is required for online meetings. So here we go. Sharonda,
Aye.
Keith,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
Adam,
Yes.
Bob Cohen, Mayor Curtatone, Tom Daniel, John DePriest,
Aye.
Yolanda,
Aye.
Sandra,
Yes.
Mo,
Aye.
Tabor,
Aye.
Angie,
Aye.
Steve Olenoff,
Aye.
Caitlin, George, Courtney,
Aye.
Jenny,
Aye.
Vandana,
Aye.
Sam,
Aye.
Steve Silvera,
Aye.
Lauren, Mayor Spicer, Juan, Elaine,
Aye.
Aaron, aye. Motion passes. Thank you very much, everyone. Great. Next up on the agenda is the report of the executive director. Mark, take it away.
Aaron, thank you very much. There is no written report of the executive director this month due to the Bergman rule, which allows me to provide you with written reports every now and then, generally every 2 to 3 months. But we had a long one. I think it was a 3-month one last month. So this will be just a brief verbal update on a few things. First of all, I'm very proud of the staff, particularly in economic development, but also in many other departments that provided assistance and support for filing a Build Back Better application with the Economic Development Administration yesterday at approximately 8 p.m., a full 4 hours before the government portal closed. This is a request for a phase 1 planning grant of $500,000 to support the efforts of MAPC, 10 allied regional planning agencies and economic development districts, and I would say about 3 dozen allied organizations, including cities and towns, business organizations, and community-based entities to grow the cybersecurity jobs cluster across Massachusetts, to help close the digital divide in both urban and rural areas, and to try and make sure that training and job opportunities in this sector are fully available to the communities most severely impacted by the COVID pandemic and recession. Over the course of the past several weeks, as I have had to meet with people and sell them on this application, your executive director did what I consider to be an exemplary job of pretending to be a cybersecurity expert. In reality, I learned a great deal from those members of my staff who do have this down pat and who are convinced that this will be a strong application and an excellent place to try and establish greater equity and help reduce the racial wealth divide in the Commonwealth. The BBB program is very, very competitive. It is in phase one, a up to $500,000 planning grant, but that is followed in not that distant a future, I think it's next March, I'm not 100% sure, with a phase two application for literally $25 to $100 million in resources that could be applied to the actual implementation of the plan. And phase one is very competitive. Phase two will be kind of out of your mind competitive. But I think we have a strong and reasonable chance. We are also not the applicant, but we have associated ourselves with and joined the coalition that is spearheaded by the Rocky Mountain Institute, the state of New York, and the city of Boston to apply under the same program for a grant that would work on the issue of improving the energy efficiency of existing buildings in our communities. This is very consistent with a tremendous amount of work that we are doing, particularly in the clean energy department, and would hopefully bring us additional resources as well as important alliances across the country in this very important topic area. We have also indicated less formal support for a number of other applications. And these BBB applications are only the first of a series of 5 notices of funding opportunity from the EDA for EDA ARPA funds that we will be participating in, even though I think this will probably be the only one that we actually lead with a direct application. So congratulations to Josh Eichen, Raul Gonzalez, Sukanya Sharma, Mark Rassicott, and many other people beyond the ones I could name. Lizzie was actively engaged on behalf of government affairs, who worked on this application really just 24/7 for the last 3 weeks, I would say. Another important thing that's happening at the agency these days is hiring. We are hiring and onboarding a lot of people. I'll be perfectly honest, somewhat more people than I would like to hire and onboard, because we are replacing people who are moving on to other parts of the country, often to be near a family, in some cases to be able to afford to buy a house, and also people who have just decided that they want to do something else. I know from my colleagues at regional planning agencies in major metropolitan areas throughout the country that this is common these days. This is a situation everybody is grappling with. I think a lot of people are deciding to make changes in their personal and or their professional lives. I think a lot of people honestly want to be somewhere different than they were during the pandemic. And it is very sad to lose people. At the same time, I would say we have a very strong MAPC Alumni Association. Many of them remain in this area and become strong allies in other places. That is actually a really common and consistent thing about MAPC, is that we sort of have MAPC graduates all over the Commonwealth and all over New England. And I would say that we are bringing people in. I would say the hiring process sort of has the following attributes. One is that we're not getting as many applications as we used to. That is seemingly true throughout the economy at this point in time. But we do tend to be getting very high quality applications. And so there's not a single person that I've hired in the last 6 months where I felt I was settling in any way, shape, or form. We have great new people coming on board with energy, with enthusiasm. They're coming to Boston, honestly, from all over the country. As other people are moving to other places, like we lost someone to Chicago and we lost someone to Philadelphia, people are also moving here. And I'm really excited about the new people we have on board. We are going to have to continue to put the pedal to the metal. I guess that's not an appropriate statement for a non-fossil fuel organization, but I don't know what the new right one is. We are going to have to continue to work very hard on hiring and in recruitment. And right now, as I often say around the office, I am much more worried about not having enough people than I am about not having enough money. Yesterday, the office has approved a few months of contracts totaling $3 million in revenue, and that's only over a few months. And I really feel like we have just endless requests for work and plans and assistance and support and engagement help and help with hybrid meetings and all kinds of work. But thank you, Mo. But the issue is having enough staff, particularly in a small number of departments where there's been more transition than in others. So working very hard on that. And then the last thing I'll say on this is that I am very proud of the fact that 2/3 of the people we have hired since the pandemic began are staff of color, and demonstrate an ongoing commitment and, more importantly, accomplishment in terms of diversifying the ranks of the MAPC staff, which has been a longstanding goal of ours, as you know. So that's a little bit on hiring and staffing. The last thing I want to talk about is our reopening of the office. Angela, who's on the screen, Jen Garcia, Margie Weinberger, Allison Zimmern, who I think is on the screen, and Heidi Anderson. I feel like I'm forgetting one other key person, I'm not sure, have been Barry Keppard from Public Health, have been very deeply engaged in building a reopening plan for MAPC. It has gone through numerous drafts. It isn't final yet. I have a tentative goal, fingers crossed, of sending out a final reopening plan by the end of the week, maybe the beginning of next week. We announced several dates for reopening the office. And because of Delta, we needed to change all of those. And so I began to feel a little silly asking people to come back on September 1st, September 6th, September 13th, October 17th, it just didn't make much sense. So instead, we adopted a series of metrics, all of which can be found on the COVID Act Now website, which, when they cross a certain threshold, will trigger the reopening of the office. Now, the office is open now voluntarily. There are staff people here every day on every floor. I'd say about maybe 4 to 6 on each floor. They come in, different people come in at different times, which is nice. I'm here about 3 days a week. And the only difference is that no one is required to come in. And when we reach the proper point with the thresholds, we will give the staff a 2-week notification, and they know this already. And after that, people will be required to be in the office on a hybrid schedule at least 2 days per week. And they will be required to be vaccinated. We are not offering a testing option. It is always possible that there will be medical or religious exemptions. But even before the governor announced his plan, we had decided that MAPC would be a vaccine requiring organization. And I am looking forward, I think most of the staff are looking forward to the time when the office will once again reach that reopening threshold, and we can be together more and working together more, even though we are to some extent already at this point in time. The last thing I am going to mention is just one other thing, and that is the MAN Award. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to do that when we get to discuss the October 27th council meeting. So that's it. That's a basic update. Sorry, Aaron, I did forget one very important thing, which I've discussed extensively with the officers, and that is the hiring of a new deputy director. Over the course of the last few months since Rebecca left, I have been engaged in conversations with directors, managers, and officers, as well as a number of my colleagues from other regional planning agencies across the country, about the status of the team that helps me to run the agency. I think most everybody here knows we were not going to stick with one deputy director. That is just not enough. So what we have decided is that there are going to be 3 deputy directors at MAPC, each one of whom will have certain departments reporting to them. And then a couple of departments will report to me, which is different than the situation I used to have, which is, it was about 6 to 8 departments reporting to me. And of course, now at the moment, it's all the departments are reporting to me. The 3 deputy directors will be, and this will be the order in which they are hired. First, we will hire a deputy director for public affairs and advocacy. Second, we will hire a deputy director for sustainable development, which is largely the planning functions of the agency. And third, we will hire a deputy director for administration. That may not happen for another year. From a management and from a financial perspective, it makes sense for us to ramp this system up, but not to hire everyone all at once. And this afternoon, I have a meeting with Jen and with Angela, who have been working on a job description for the first of those positions. And fingers crossed, I am hoping we are going to be able to post that by the end of this week. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions.
Hi, it's Sharonda. I don't have a question mark, but I think it's a smart decision given all that you have on your plate and how much MAPC has been expanding over the years. It's always important for an organization to just look at the structure and make sure the leadership supports it. So I think it sounds like a great idea how you've divided it up, as well as kind of phasing it in and not trying to go all at one time. But yeah, I mean, I think it would work well for you. I always wonder, you're like Superman over there. You need a team.
I'm not Superman. Everything I accomplish is accomplished by the people who are working here. But, you know, I sometimes say that when I arrived here in 2002, there were 30 staff and 3 deputy directors. When Rebecca left, there were 105 staff and 1 deputy director. Now, Rebecca was a superwoman and probably still is, but leaving that aside, it's too much. It's too much for both of us to handle. And, you know, to be perfectly honest, it may have contributed to her desire to move on. And it's tough for me as well. So we need more support at the top. And depending upon the position, they're excellent candidates internally or externally for all of these positions. And I have great confidence that when we hire them all, we'll have a great team here at MAPC, as we already do. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next up on the agenda is the report of the Legislative Committee. I'm going to call on Legislative Committee Chair Keith to kick off the update.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and hello, everyone. The Legislative Committee has met twice in recent months. On September 15th, we discussed the public banking matters, which are on today's agenda, and on October 13th, the waste reduction ones. And we'll first have a legislative update from the team, but I just wanted to say now that the Legislative Committee did vote to recommend at those meetings that the Executive Committee vote to support the legislation that's listed on today's agenda. So let me go to a full screen and see who's here to, and I'm assuming there's Lizzie. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that. So just very briefly, I'm going to turn it over to Diego on the public banking legislation, and Leah, who I actually don't see yet, but she will be joining us for the waste bills. And I want to just kind of give like a very brief update of things that are happening in the State House, because things are actually happening. So the governor today has indicated he'll be signing the supplemental closeout budget from FY21. The reason that that's actually really important is because there was actually a significant amount of surplus dollars that the legislature decided not to take up in that closeout budget. And we have to do a closeout budget as a state by October 31st, usually every year. Just before October 31st, our comptroller like kind of freaks out, and there's frantic messages back and forth inside the building and the administration. And this year we'll actually have the closeout budget on time, but we did not actually take up the surplus dollars that we had at the end of FY21. The reason that that's really important is that the legislature has indicated that they will take up those surplus dollars alongside sort of whatever they start to do around ARPA. We are expecting to see an ARPA bill move inside the building, maybe even as early as next week or the following week. We don't have a sense right now of how much will be in that first tranche of ARPA dollars. I've heard they're going to do the majority of it right now. I've heard they're definitely doing it in 2 tranches. I've heard, oh, they're going to absolutely do it in 3 and stretch it out so they have money to use next legislative session. So I feel like a lot of options are on the table. I do expect that because particularly in the House and then a little bit in the Senate too, members were invited, like they are in the budget process, to kind of give some of their major priorities around investments. And so I think probably what you'll see is a combination of some of those surplus funds used maybe for those earmark requests, and the ARPA dollars ideally going for a whole host of other priorities. MAPC there were 7 ARPA hearings. MAPC, I think, testified at all of them, or coordinated testimony for all of them. They were very long. I just like blessings on Tom Ambrosino, who sat through like a 6-hour hearing and testified at like 3:45 one day. We have a really lovely set of materials that our communications department put together, and we're all happy to send that out to everybody so you can kind of see where MAPC landed on all of our investment priorities. And we had conversations with a number of you, with a lot of our advocacy stakeholders that really helped to inform those. So we will send those out. So I just quickly kind of wanted everyone to know where those things all stand. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diego Hueso to introduce the public banking legislation for us to take a position on.
Cool. Thanks, Lizzie. Good afternoon. So it's 12:01. Hope everybody's not too tired from the Red Sox game. I'm feeling a little indifferent, or I don't know, confused about today's 4:00 game. But anyways, talking about public banking. So the ask of the executive committee is to endorse legislation creating a Massachusetts public bank. It wasn't, like Keith said, it was endorsed by the legislative committee. Just so you're aware, it was something that the Metro mayors also endorsed a few weeks ago, and is a bill that MAPC have been working really closely with BECMAN, which is the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And so the bills that we're talking about today, it's 2 versions of them, one filed by Representatives Connolly, El Lugardo, and Senator Eldridge, and then the other is filed by Senator Hines. And so again, both create a Massachusetts public bank. We're asking again the executive committee endorse bills like that. And so what is a public bank? I'm not a banker, but it's pretty self-explanatory in the sense that it is a bank that is owned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Specifically, these bills, they're very similar. The 2 big differences from the top, I'll say, are just the amount of capitalization of the bills of the bank. One of them is $200 million over 4 years. Another is $2 billion over 4 years. The other big difference is who like the composition of the board of directors, or the board of the bank, I should say. Other than that, they both really are focused on ensuring that investments from a Massachusetts public bank are focused on equity priorities, including supporting small businesses, investing in communities that have traditionally not seen a lot of investment, investments in climate change type of infrastructure, water infrastructure, transportation, housing, economic development, agricultural investment. So it's actually really interesting to see that both versions of the bill explicitly call out certain, these kind of certain buckets. The other kind of equity focused component of a public bank is, as we saw from the first round of PPP loans, the majority, I don't think the majority of the ones that received these loans in Massachusetts were not small businesses. There weren't a lot of businesses that were owned by women or communities of color. And I think one of the purposes of public banks is to ensure that those type of sectors and enterprises do have equal access to these kind of opportunities and financial resources. And just the back to the capitalization of the bill. Obviously, those investments are over the first 4 years. With these kind of investments and loaning opportunities, the idea is that after 4 years, the bank will be much more self-sufficient and won't need to go back to the legislature to ask for more funds. The way the bills are written at the moment, it does allow for federal funds and grants to be used. The banks are allowed to receive federal funds or grants, and which just so happens to be perfect because the state received at least $5 billion in federal funds, and according to Treasury guidance, ARPA funds are allowed to be used for capitalization of these kind of state-owned banks. Just like the three final things in terms of kind of like why public banks are a good idea. We've heard from local leaders, again, some of these smaller businesses, and kind of those advocates, that public banking would allow kind of like riskier businesses or riskier enterprises or projects to receive funding from a bank. I think, for example, like local government projects take a little longer to kind of, get that investment return back. Are longer periods of time too, and some banks just don't want to be involved in that business, and public banks would be one alternative to that. And then the public bank isn't meant to kind of replace local banks. It's not meant to replace these larger banks. It's not meant to replace the Mass Growth Capital Corporation or other kind of state agencies like that, but really to be like another tool for municipalities, small businesses, the state to kind of use as leverage. And then right now, I think there's a lot of discussion that it's a favorable time to borrow, which might be the case with low interest, but that's obviously going to change at some point. And I think that thinking is that public banking, again, is another resource that will be just more accessible to these kind of projects. So I'll just pause there and see if any folks have any questions about the public banking piece. And obviously any legislative committee members that might want to speak up, if I might have missed something, feel free to chime in.
Diego, you can call on anyone who has questions.
Sure. I don't see any hands. Oh, I see Buzz and then Tabor and then Sandra.
So great presentation. That was good. I wonder, to the extent, can you brief us on what the banking community as a whole how it's responding to this, whether it's negative or whether it's actually seeing it as removing some of the obligations which are sometimes put on them, and whether there's an impact on the Community Reinvestment Act, to which the banks have always been responsible, and will this be seen as an opportunity for them to either affirm CRA work or maybe run away from it? Any thoughts on what the banks are up to?
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Beckman, but in just like the updates that we've received on kind of coalition calls with them, they are really active with a few local banks, especially. And I don't, again, like I think the point we're trying to hammer with some of these banks, and I think some of these local banks are very receptive to, are exactly that. It's not meant to kind of replace, because it's not like, if I want to open up an account, I'm not going to go to the Massachusetts Public Bank, right? I'm going to go to Eastern Bank or Cambridge Savings or whatever it is. So even in just that sense, it's not meant to be competitive with some of these banks. And then in the bill, I can't recall like the exact language for it, but it allows for, I think it's called participatory lending or something like that, where like the public bank can partner with one of these local banks to kind of make sure to kind of cover some of the riskier parts of the loan. So it is meant to be, again, very cooperative, very complementary to existing banks. In terms of the CRA question, I'm not too familiar with how banks, how like this might qualify for banks of standing in terms of the CRA. So I can get
address
on
that a
post.
little. I can address that, Diego. So as Diego indicated, there are a number of individual banks that are supportive. Mass Bankers Association is not supportive at the moment. I honestly think that's going to fade as individual banks recognize this is not a competition for deposits and it's not a competition for regular business. It's actually an opportunity, not completely dissimilar from what we provide with the Land Bank or with Mass Housing or with CDAC, or with a number of other organizations that basically provide loans that banks don't provide. There is no direct negative impact on CRA. There is no change on Massachusetts or federal CRA obligations, because this is fundamentally not a bill about banks. It's a bill about a public bank. And so the requirements on the banks remain the same. However, I can envision circumstances where a participatory process, as Diego mentioned, where Eastern Bank, for example, goes into a project with the public bank, there might be the possibility for Eastern to receive some CRA credit for that work.
I think it's Tabor and then Sandra.
Yeah, I guess my question here would be, how does this relate to, let's say, standard SBA practices? I mean, most of the public banks that are not public, it's a home for-profit banks that are out there right now use the SBA, their 504 program, et cetera, for either commercial real estate lending and or small investment entrepreneurial lending through quite a few of these smaller groups, economic development corporations and nonprofits. So in my view, and I'm just not aware of it, where would this pick up of where those leave off? Is this, why are we calling it a bank and not just giving out grants for banks to administer? Because at the end of the day, if we're looking to have the money paid back, then it's going to be under certain accounting and regulatory practices, or it's not. I'm not so sure I see where the need is for this versus some of the other programs that are already there. Why are those not adequate?
That's a good question, and I think like the way I would respond to that is, you know, the Mass Growth Capital Corporation is exactly that, right? It's a grant organization, so you do have to go back to the legislature, you know, every year to get that authorized. Where I think the public bank is meant to be obviously self-sustaining, and you don't have to. The idea is, right, you don't have to go back to the legislature every single 4 years for money if you're getting that return back. Yeah, in terms of the SBA question, I can follow up with some of the folks at Beckman to see if they have a better response to that, because I'm not too familiar with, you know, exactly like how that would work.
I would note that this is a lending institution. It's going to make loans, and the loans are going to have to be underwritten. And if it operates in the way that most other similar institutions have operated, either in the Commonwealth, where there tend to be sort of topical banks like Mass Housing or the Land Bank, or in other parts of the country, like the very well-regarded public bank in North Dakota, for example. If it works in this way, the organization will be initially capitalized, and then it will operate on its own, because it's not supposed to write failing loans. It's supposed to write successful loans. And I think that's what's likely to happen here. I think that it will supplement the SBA and other programs, but will not replace them, and will enable a number of borrowers who can't, for one reason or another, to receive funding currently, to be able to do so. Also, SBA loans are strictly to businesses. We see the public bank also as a lender to cities and towns, which is an important reason why we are supporting it, and to increase the capital that's available to cities and towns beyond what they might currently have. I think likely through participation rather than through the sort of 100% funding of an individual project.
I think the last thing I just add on that is to, like the kind of like the basic part of your question, which I think is important, is why aren't we going through products that already exist? And I think it's honestly just that they haven't worked to reach some of these businesses and institutions that are trying to get off the ground, that they have been unsuccessful in going to traditional banks, even through non-traditional programs, like sort of newer and innovative programs, to receive funding. And so it is a way to sort of expand the scope of, lending options to businesses that have been traditionally underserved and maybe even disinvested by traditional banking mechanisms.
Thanks. Sandra and then Karen.
Thanks. I got my questions answered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Diego, I may have missed this, but the underwriting criteria, walk me through again how that is proposed to be overseen. Like who gets to decide and change the underwriting criteria? Because presumably that's a tool in a public bank.
Yeah, I haven't memorized every single person on the board of directors. I can follow up with you. I can share with the whole executive committee, like the differences between who's appointed to where. Yeah, I think is that kind of what you're asking? Because
So the answer is the board of directors is charged with that criteria.
So that they would hire, again, I think one bill says the executive director is hired by the board of directors, and then obviously that person is charged with creating some of these guidelines and everything. But I can follow up with you via email because it's a little lengthier to put in the chat.
That's okay. I'll read the common text, but that answers the macro question. Thank you.
Yeah, and the board appointments, I will say it's one of the places where the bills differ, is sort of like what the board makeup looks like. And I think there's some room there to kind of make sure that we're coming out with a really strong board. But they do actually end up having that authority and oversight on the underwriting criteria in either instance.
Steve? Oh, sorry, Erin.
No, it's totally fine. I missed Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, that's okay. I just figured out how to raise my hand. So Lizzie just pointed out one of the issues I was going to raise is that the bills definitely differ as to who appoints the board of directors and who runs them. I also think the bills differ in that, at least in one of the bills, these loans, I believe, are full faith and credit of the Commonwealth. So I don't know. Am I correct on that, or did I misread one of the bills? I think 665 might be full faith and credit. I'm not sure about the other ones.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of them is not FDIC insured, which I think gets to that issue, right?
I think the FDIC insurance would be different, although I'm getting a little out of my wheelhouse here in banking, but I do believe at least one of them states that these loans have the full faith of the Commonwealth standing behind them.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I guess I would ask, Steve, are you asking because it's an interesting point, or because you feel we should go one way or the other in favor of full faith and credit of the Commonwealth, or not? Because that's certainly an area where we could develop an opinion and have an influence.
So I think that's an important, assuming that I'm correct in that, I think that's just important for people to know. And I guess unlike a normal bank, which, were they to make nothing but bad loans, they would eventually run out of business. If it's got the full faith of the Commonwealth behind it, that would not be the case here. And so that gives me pause, but I want to be a little careful here because I'm probably going to abstain from voting on this because I'm not, so I was raising that as a factual point, not as a matter of having an opinion.
I might note, Steve, that in our country, there are some banks who make terrible loans and don't go out of business. But leaving that issue aside, I could see the arguments on full faith and credit in both directions. I think that's a very interesting and important point. I think in the course of our discussions and advocacy, we should probably try and develop a perspective on that question. I would not be prepared to opine on it right now. I can see the pros and cons in both directions.
Great.
Yep. Thanks for raising that. And I just put in the chat text that what it says.
Great. Thank you, Diego. And I know Lizzie did a correction as well in the chat, so it might be of value to keep that chat open for everyone. Is there any other questions on that? I guess my question is, how should the executive committee proceed? What is the ask? And maybe that's a question for Keith or Diego or Lizzie, or I'm just asking for clarity as far as the motion goes. So Keith?
Yeah, I'd suggest that the motion, why don't I make a motion that the executive committee approve the recommendation of the legislative committee to support public banking legislation, House 1223, Senate 665, and Senate 682.
I see that as a motion. Is there a second? Oh, I see lots of hands up. Can we get a second in front of us? And then, thank you, Jenny. So motion made by Keith, second made by Jenny. I don't know who went up first, if it was Karen or Tabor. Okay, you're going this way, but my person's this way. So Tabor, with your hand up.
My reaction is that this may be a good idea. I just don't understand enough about it. And unfortunately, I did not fully read the bills yet. I haven't had the time to go through them fully. But I deal with risky customers all day long, and some of them truly do not deserve to be financed. But there are a million programs out there, it seems, from every bank, and they're subsidized by federal agencies and by nonprofits to get all sorts of loans for all sorts of everything from a yogurt stand to major manufacturers. I just don't understand why Massachusetts needs to be in that business too. It seems counterintuitive when we could be in the business of making a grant or some other loan subsidy to the open banking situation that is already there. They've already got underwriters, et cetera. And that could lessen the pain. I mean, the loans that banks do with SBA guarantees from the feds are incredibly risky. And banks won't touch them. But if the federal government's picking up 50% of the tab or taking 50% of the risk, it always seems to make more sense to them. So I'm not so sure if there isn't some other means for us to get involved without setting up a whole new banking system, which we're then saddled with forever. It's a lot of, it seems like it's a very expensive proposition. I don't understand who's paying for this at the end and how this is going to be funded. So I just don't know enough about it, I guess.
Mark, do you want to respond? Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. I think there are plenty of programs, and we are still in a situation where people have difficulty obtaining capital, even if they either have a decent credit rating or, more usually, have the ability to establish a decent credit rating, but no one's willing to take a chance on them to begin with. The public banks in other parts of the country and world, we don't have that many of them in the United States, but we have one in North Dakota that's very well regarded, and which has accomplished amazing things in that state for many, many years, since the 1920s, I believe. And we have public banks in other countries. And we have public banks that aren't called public banks, but that serve as sources of capital by almost every state in the country. They're usually topically limited, as I indicated before, for housing, for economic development, for a variety of other topic areas. And the usual process is that they are established, they are capitalized, and then they underwrite. And if they, in almost all cases, they are successful and profitable and do not have to be recapitalized on a regular basis by the state in which they are located. There are exceptions to that. There are failures, but they tend to be relatively few and far between. And I think it's important to note that this is not only a bank for for-profit businesses, although that is important. The ability to make loans to nonprofit organizations, to municipalities, and to other entities and the ability to take a portion of the risk in a participatory scheme of lending with other institutions will all be possibilities under the public bank. The idea has been around on Beacon Hill for a long time. Its principal champion, actually, is the Senate president. And I think that it makes sense for us to add this additional tool to the Commonwealth's arsenal, especially at a time when we see certain communities defined geographically or in other ways that have suffered tremendously during the pandemic and its accompanying recession, and that need additional ways of getting back on their feet. Now, I would note that, as you know, the executive committee endorsing pieces of legislation never means that we endorse the bills verbatim and do not pursue appropriate amendments. And I think those amendments should not only be to make sure the capital is widely available in the Commonwealth, they should also be to ensure that the Commonwealth's investments are protected and that the loans are reasonably drawn, and that the governing statute has requirements in it in that regard. And I think that, you know, MAPC's voice in that regard would be a valuable one in the legislative discussion. So my hope is that the committee would see itself clear to be able to move forward with this legislation and be supportive of our allies, both in the legislature and community and business-based organizations like BECMA, who have asked us for their endorsement. I might note that the Metro Mayors Coalition has already endorsed this legislation. So we already have, you know, those 15 cities and towns that constitute approximately half our population that have endorsed this already. And I don't think there were any dissenters among the mayors there, but Lizzie will tell me if I'm wrong. Okay.
That's right.
And they actually, the mayors, Mayor Fuller and Mayor Christensen, did ask for an extra time to review the proposal with their staff, and all came back and were supportive.
Thank you, Mark. Karen?
Thank you. I think that the proposal for a public bank, as Mark said, has been well discussed, and I think would really be exactly that, another tool, and I support it. The differential, though, the differentiation and the thing that I want to just kind of keep coming back to is, if one of the bills is, you know, basically guaranteed by the Commonwealth and the other is not, and someone earlier was saying that there was concern from the bankers because they didn't want the competition. The one that is in the, you know, that is fully guaranteed by the Commonwealth is basically saying we're going to compete for other accounts. So there's a real fundamental positioning difference between those two statements. I'm not sure that I've had time enough to really think that through. And I've forgotten which one is, so the S665 is the one that has the support, the full faith. I don't think, I'm not opposed to that. I think it would be awesome to generate deposits, because there are banks that, you know, are in private banks now that say, we will invest in green money, you know, whatever. You can put your money where your values are. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I really think it makes a big difference in which of these paths should be, that this committee should support. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So if I could just jump in real quick, I would just reiterate the fact that the ask is that the executive committee endorse legislation to create a public bank. Like Mark had said earlier, like we're happy to continue this conversation and provide amendments to whatever proposal advances. You know, I'm happy to talk with some of the folks that have already raised this particular issue to better understand that piece, and again, to make sure that we have an informed, a more informed position when we do weigh in on whatever proposal advances.
And Mark eloquently wrote in the chat, potentially a friendly amendment based on the conversation that was just had, and I think some vocalized pause in the different aspects of the different kind of bills. Keith, you were the
Yeah.
maker of the motion.
Yeah,
Are
I'd be
you-
happy to offer that as a substitute motion that move that the executive committee endorse the concept of a public bank for Massachusetts and urge the staff to work with legislators and advocates to pass legislation that balances the need for capital with appropriate protections for the Commonwealth.
Second.
Okay, great. And Mo, was that your hand?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure there were no outstanding questions with that. So motion made by Keith, second made by Mo. I'm going to assume for minutes purposes, Keith, that means you withdrew your first motion.
Correct.
Okay, and Jenny, or as the seconder of that first motion, you are good with that, correct?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. Your camera's not on, so I just assumed you were nodding. Glad I got that assumption down. So the new motion was made by Keith and seconded by Mo, and the motion was stating that the executive committee endorses the concept of a public bank for Massachusetts and urges staff to work with legislators and advocates to pass legislation that balances the need for capital with appropriate protections for the Commonwealth. So with that, if there's no other commentary or questions, I'd like to move forward with the vote, if that's okay with everyone. Great. Oh, thank you. I love compliments, so thank you for that compliment. So if everyone will just unmute, I would appreciate it. So here we go in the vote. And if there's any, I'm going to go a little slower because I think there might be some dissension or abstentions. Totally fine. I just want to make sure we capture it correctly. So here we go with roll call. Sharonda.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Adam.
Aye.
Bob Cohen. Mayor Curtatone. Tom Daniel. John DePriest.
Aye.
Yolanda, I think we had to leave. Sandra.
Aye.
Mo.
Aye.
Tabor.
Aye.
Angie.
Aye.
Steve Olenoff.
Aye.
Caitlin. George Proakis. Courtney.
Abstain.
Jenny.
Aye.
Vandana.
Abstain.
Sam.
Aye.
Steve Silvera.
Abstain.
Lauren Shirtliff. Mayor Spicer. Juan. Elaine.
Abstain.
And Erin, aye. So the motion passes with Courtney Rainey, Vandana Rao, Steve Silvera, and Elaine Vanya abstaining. Thank you all for that. And thank you, Legislative Committee and Government Affairs staff for your assistance in that conversation. So next up, we are going to talk about waste reduction legislation. Keith, where are you on my screen? Keith, do you want to introduce that?
I actually just want to check really quickly. I know Mark had sort of promised a shorter meeting. We're at that moment. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know what people want to do. We would like to be able to endorse solid waste legislation. I don't know if it's possible for that to wait until November, Lizzie.
The
Thank
bills
you.
have already had a hearing. So at this point, we're sort of weighing in after the fact, after the formal hearing has happened. So we're not trying to beat that time crunch. So if it needs to be another month, I think that's okay.
It's up to Erin and others as to whether or not they wish to postpone this item on the agenda or do it now.
I personally could continue. I think that the committee, as long as we are able to continue to meet, but I think the committee, this is probably has less discussion. I don't want to make any assumptions, but most likely less discussions than the creation of a public bank. Is everyone comfortable? I mean, maybe people hate recycling, but perhaps if everyone's okay with it, I'd like to continue and just kind of get these moving. I hate to slow down our opportunity to kind of fold in. How does everyone feel? Want to give me one of these? Yeah, okay. Okay, and if you have to leave, you have to leave, but let's just, and thank you, Lizzie, for looking at the time. I appreciate it. And I do like to be conscious of people's time. So Keith, take it away.
I think it's Leah.
Yep, I can.
I'm sorry, Leah, take it away.
So I'll just start and frame that this is a conversation that really started with our subregions and with planners sort of raising concerns about the rising costs of recycling and that municipalities have limited control over what comes into their waste stream and really looking to the state for assistance in some of those pieces. So we have before you 3 bills that look at solid waste and really trying to help make sure that we're able as a state to meet the very ambitious and exciting new state solid waste master plan goals that came out just this week. So it's an exciting time to be talking about waste. So the first is an act to expand the bottle bill, which I think many of you are familiar with. It's a bill MAPC has previously endorsed. It's been modified a bit in its new form. We had been involved in 2008 and in 2010, and then it went on to a ballot initiative when we were not involved. So the changes this session are a more expansive definition of what bottles would be covered and an increase in the deposit amount. And a more frequent review of those container handling fees. So that's one bill. The second bill is extended producer responsibility legislation. And that has recently been adopted in the state of Maine. So we have a recent local example of how that legislation plays out. And this would create a program to fund and improve our municipal recycling systems by ensuring that companies that produce consumer packaging and printer paper share in some of those waste management costs. So we're sort of sharing some of that cost burden. And then there's an omnibus recycling bill that would follow the leadership of communities. So many communities around our region, I think more than half, I did a look at one point, have banned certain single-use plastics like straws and plastic bags. And this would expand that list of single-use plastics that are prohibited. And there's definitely carve-outs for certain healthcare organizations and health situations, and carve-outs for business sizes, similar to what exists now for many of those single-use plastic bans. So it's really adding to that list and expanding it. So, and those are really based on what our recycling centers can't actually recycle. So it's responding to some of those changes in how recycling is happening. So that is a very brief summary of the 3 bills that we have before you. I'll add to, just as part of the context, it was really wonderful during the legislative committee hearing. We were able to hear from Representative Michelle Socolo, who is now co-chairing the Solid Waste Caucus at the legislature, which she helped to establish this session.
That MAPC alum group, right? Yeah.
Yes, and CLF gave the presentation, and those are the fact sheets that we sent out in advance. As there's a large coalition supporting these bills that we would be adding our voice to, and I'm glad to talk more about that. I do see a hand from Sandra.
Oh yes, thank you, Leah. Sandra.
Thanks. These sound great. I just wondered, as we know, the a referendum to not move ahead with updating the recycling bill did pass in 2008. And how long do you have to wait until the legislature is willing to act that would be contrary to a referendum?
The legislature can do whatever it wants, including repeal a referendum, unfortunately. It's happened to me a few times. But yeah, it's not like, you know, a zoning vote where you might have to wait 1 year or 2 years until you bring it up again.
Thanks. Okay, great. Tabor.
So since this affects the municipalities and certainly the citizens, but the municipality leaders that run these, the DPWs, the town managers, et cetera, is there a group of managers that has gotten behind this legislation and supports it, or they have own particular? I know in my town of Milton in particular, the town manager has their own issues, and I don't know how this plays out across the state, how many other people are supporting this or what other issues they have. I'm sure I'm very supportive of the idea, but I just want to make sure that we do it. We don't end up leaving something on the table we shouldn't have.
That's a great question. I don't know if there's a listing of specific town managers and administrators that have weighed in. I know that the MMA has weighed in with support for, I believe, all of these bills, but definitely the EPR and the omnibus recycling bill. They have weighed in with a comment and support.
Thank you.
Of course.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? You're in 2 pages, so if I miss you, just kind of give a yell. Otherwise, sounds good. Okay, where is Keith? There you are, Keith. Do you, as legislative chair, what would the legislative committee like as in form of the motion before us?
Well, I'm happy to make the following motion, move that the executive committee vote to accept the recommendation of the legislative committee to support the waste reduction legislation, and may I refer to it as printed in the agenda.
Second that.
Great. So the motion was made by Keith to accept the recommendation of the legislative committee regarding waste reduction legislation, with the second made by John DePriest. Is there any comments, questions before we take a roll call vote? Great, I appreciate it. So if everyone could come off mute, I'm probably going to do this a little quicker than the last one, but a little slower than my typical adjournment one. So Sharonda?
Aye.
Keith?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Bob Cohen? Mayor Curtatone? Tom Daniel? John DePriest?
Aye.
Yolanda? Sandra?
Aye.
Mo?
Aye.
Tabor?
Aye.
Angie?
Aye.
Steve Olenoff?
Aye.
Caitlin? George? Courtney?
Abstain.
Jenny?
Aye.
Vandana?
Abstain.
Sam Seibel?
Aye.
Steve Silvera?
Aye.
I didn't hear that, Steve. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you.
It
Lauren?
sound unusual coming from me.
No. No judgment made on my end. I just wanted to make sure I didn't hear an abstain. Lauren? Mayor Spicer? Juan? Elaine?
Abstain.
And Aaron, aye. So that motion passes with Courtney Rainey, Vandana Rao, and Elaine Vanya being the abstentions. Thank you so much. And thank you, Government Affairs and the Legislative Committee, for all your work on that. Great. Next up on the agenda is review agenda for fall council meeting, which, by the way, is next week.
Yes.
On October 27th. Mark?
October 27th. Erin has tried to encourage me to nail down precisely when it will begin, because sometimes there's a lack of clarity about sort of when the room opens and when it actually begins. And without having given her any warning, I'm going to see if Sasha has any information on this. Heidi is not in today and could not attend this meeting, so I can't check with Heidi.
Yes, we are working on the agenda and hope to share it soon. We will be focusing on MetroCommon 2050 during the council meeting, and you can register. I would also like to say that if you are interested in discussing any components of the MetroCommon 2050 plan, we do have office hours happening tomorrow where you can meet with Eric Hove and other Metro Common 2050 team members to discuss any portions of the plan that you may be interested in before we have the meeting, where we will also have time for discussion. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we will be discussing the MAN Award as well.
Sasha, do you know when the meeting is scheduled to commence on the 27th?
Yes, at 9:30, but we are asking folks to join around 9:15 for
Roll call.
for roll call. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So there will be an agenda coming out around 9:15. If you could get on, that would be great, because you know that everyone who gets on in those first 15 minutes, we can check their presence off. And it's much easier if we only have to call like 20 names than 140 names. So try to get on a few minutes early, please. And then the business meeting will start at 9:30. In addition to the very important business of approving Metro Common, for which we need a quorum, so I hope that all of you will attend. We will also be presenting our first Theodore Mann Regional Leadership Award in the last 2 years. It was suspended last year. Honestly, not so much because of COVID as a tragedy in the Mann family, but it is being restored. And Rick and his sister Debbie and others are very glad to have it restored. And as I discussed with the officers on Monday, I believe, this year will represent the very first time that we are making a Mann Award to folks in the public health sector to recognize the incredible work that they have done serving the public during the COVID pandemic. And the award will be going to Meredith Hurley, Lauren Buck, and Flora Maya, who are the public health directors in the communities of Winthrop, Revere, and Chelsea, who work tirelessly and regionally as part of the North Suffolk Public Health Collaborative, but also with many other surrounding communities to address a myriad of issues during the pandemic. We have never acknowledged with the Mann Award anyone in the public health field. We have gone beyond mayors and managers, but we have not gone into the public health field. And I think all of us, I hope I speak for the officers in this regard, and I know I speak for the family, feel that it would be fabulous to use this opportunity to recognize these three women who contributed so tremendously to the public health and safety of those hard-hit communities. Those will be the two major agenda items, Metro Common and the Mann Award. There are no, I checked with finance yesterday, there are no financially related motions that need to be undertaken at the meeting, so we'll really be able to concentrate on those two issues.
Andrea.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to mention something you told us, the officers, which is, I believe that Chelsea has a 99% vaccination rate.
Well, I was discussing that with the ever humble Tom Ambrosino, who's the city manager in Chelsea, and he said, well, I know that that's out there, but it's kind of because the state is not really using an accurate denominator. So it's very high, but it's not quite 99%. And of course, you have to recognize that there are still plenty of kids under 12 who are not eligible yet, even though fingers crossed they're going to be eligible very soon in the 5 through 11 category. What Chelsea has accomplished is nothing short of amazing, and would be a very good story to, I think, instill a little bit of hope in some of the other communities around the country that, you know, have been so hard hit and do not have that level of vaccination.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sandra. Any other questions about that? Thank you, Sasha, for putting the registration link in the chat as well, both for the council meeting as well as for tomorrow's Metro Common office hours. Obviously, one is if you have time, and the other is highly requested by me that you come next week so we have quorum so we can move forward with the plan. Great. So next up on the agenda is the date of the next executive committee meeting. Mark, I understand that in the agenda, on the agenda, you it's supposed to be November 17th with possible rescheduling. Mark?
Yes, there may be a possible reschedule. Lizzie, am I remembering that there is something else happening on the 17th that we can't change?
Yes, that is correct. We
What is
are. It is the DLS conference, the conference that we put together, the Mass Association of Regional Planning Agencies. MAPC serves as legislative staff, and obviously Mark sits there as one of the RPA directors from across the Commonwealth. And every other year, I guess, we put together a conference with the Division of Local Services, which we would love all of you to attend. And that will be on the morning, virtually on the morning of the 17th. We do expect to be joined by the Lieutenant Governor, and we're working with the Governor's office to see if he can also clear his schedule and come and join us. But it will be from 9 until 12:30.
So I will discuss with the officers whether we should have a change. I assume we should have a change in the meeting date. That is a conference that a lot of local officials, including people on this board, attend. And we might have to change it. I don't think we're going to change it to be the day before Thanksgiving, but we will be getting back to you on that. The principal topic of discussion at that meeting will be the approval of the annual MAPC work plan.
Great. So TBD, to be determined, keep your eyes peeled, and we'll work on an appropriate reschedule date and time. But it's okay because we see each other next week at the executive, at the council meeting, not executive, at the MAPC council meeting. So hopefully we can kind of get things squared up by then. Mark, is there any other business not known at the time of the posting?
If there is, it is still not known.
Oh, okay, great. May it continue to be unknown then. Great. And with that, I am looking for a motion to adjourn at this time.
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Mo.
Anytime.
Motion made by Mo, second made by Tabor. Just before we vote and go, I want to thank everyone for sticking with us this extra 19 minutes. I really appreciate it, but don't go yet because I need to vote. Everyone come off mute, please. And here we go. Sharonda.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Aaron.
Yes.
Adam.
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone, Tom Daniel, John DePriest. Yolanda. Sandra.
Aye.
Mo.
Aye.
Tabor.
Aye.
Angie.
Aye.
Steve Olenoff.
Aye.
Caitlin. George. Courtney. Jenny. Vandana. Sam.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Lauren. Mayor Spicer. Juan. Elaine.
Aye.
And Aaron. Aye. Motion passes. The meeting is adjourned at 12:50. Thank you again, everyone.
Aaron,
Yes,
before you go, can I just talk to you after this meeting for a second?
sure can. I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.